All right, aloha, aloha mai kako, pakahia pau, and mahalo nui loa to all of you for joining us for today's Aloha Rising episode. I am pretty excited to be your moderator. My name is Kainoa, Kaumeheiwa-Rego, and I am a community outreach advocate with the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. To provide a bit of background, Aloha Rising is OHA's online civic engagement series meant to increase civic engagement amongst Native Hawaiians. This series covers a broad range of topics around OEV civic engagement and history through a cultural lens. We started this series in 2020 and just revived it for 2021. In fact, last week, Thursday's show featured Moderator and OHA's Community Outreach Manager, Davis Price, and special guests Representative Daniel Holt, Zuriel Key, and Hialani Sonora Pale for a primer on the Hawaii State Legislature. They discussed the legislative process, how to submit testimony, and key policy proposals that were likely to be introduced this year. Today, we'll be talking about OHA's legislative package, which consists of 4 very important bills. We're very fortunate to be chatting with the incredibly talented and knowledgeable folks who helped to shape and craft it. So without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our guests to briefly introduce themselves. Go ahead, Wayne.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Kainoa. Aloha, everyone. My name is Wayne Tanaka. I'm the Public Policy Manager here at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. So public policy, we're within Kapaya Ku, or the Advocacy Department. Our focus is on advocating to lawmakers, to policymakers, executive branch officials, on changes to laws or rules that may impact the interests of our beneficiaries. We try to help them make the right decisions. Within advocacy, just as a quick overview, we do also have a compliance division, which looks at the rules that exist currently and tries to ensure that the rules and laws that protect the interests of our beneficiaries are complied with. We also have a branch bureau in Washington, D.C. that kind of works on federal matters. We also have a Papa Hanao Moku Akea division, which helps uphold our co-trustee responsibilities in the monument. Yeah.
Excellent. Leimomi?
Aloha mai kako. I'm Olan Leimomi Fisher, and I'm currently serving as the interim senior public policy advocate for OHA, and I work under Wayne. I was born and raised in Mililani, and I also have roots in Aiea and Pupukea, and I've been a public policy advocate for OHA for a little over a year now, and previously I was in environmental compliance and later private litigation after that. And yeah, I'm sure you guys might have already read my bio, but other than that, I'm happy and grateful to be here, and just hopefully we can spread more awareness within our Lahui, our Native Hawaiian community, to get some support and opposition on these really important issues this session. Mahalo.
Mahalo. Brother Brutus.
Hey, Vilina kako, aloha nui, my name is Brutus LaBenz. I am a legacy land specialist for the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. I'm in the Aina department, helping to take care of what we call our legacy properties. So places like what I'll be talking about today, kukani loko, places that bear, cultural significance and can be a place for future healing and restoration for people and culture. And yeah, outside of that, I'm just kind of the good at, they tell me do this, do that. So I do that and do this. Mahalo.
Excellent. As someone that gets to work with all of you on a daily basis, these folks put a lot of time, passion, and dedication into developing sound policy for consideration. Before we hop into the package itself, I just want to encourage everyone to feel free to drop questions or comments in the chat or on Facebook Live, and we'll do our best to pick them up. And if we've got some time, we'll be sure to answer them. On that note, Leimomi, can you tell us about the first set of companion bills OHA introduced, which would be, I think, House Bill 204 and Senate Bill 389?
Yes, so I guess just going straight into our OHA package this year. I'll start with what we refer to internally as OHA 1. And it has, like you said, 2 companion bills, or basically bills that have one on the House side and one starting on the Senate side, which are identical. So the House version is House Bill 204, and the Senate version is Senate Bill 398 or 389, Kaumeheiwa-Rego. And these are basically OHA's budget bill requests for about $3 million in state general fund appropriations. And these are really important bills because they'll help support OHA's budget plans for the upcoming biennium. And important to note in these bills is that in light of the COVID-19 pandemic that we're all facing right now, they reflect the same base budget in funds that was appropriated to OHA from fiscal years 2017 to 2020. So no increase. And it's also important to note that OHA matches over half of the funds that we get from the state with trust funds, which we then leverage to triple or quadruple their impact. So even though we're just requesting $3 million from the state, we put in our own trust funds and the impact is much greater. And also in light of the COVID pandemic, we're requesting almost $1 million per year less than we most recently requested in 2019. So yeah, I mean, historically, these budget bills, OHA uses the money to strategically invest in social services, education, legal services for our beneficiaries, Native Hawaiians. And this measure would help to reaffirm our partnership with the state and allow us to meet our critical community needs, especially right now during these really hard times.
Mahalo, sis. Just in terms of what we have been able to do in community outreach, I know that the partnership we have with the state in terms of leveraging funds was essential, especially during COVID-19. I recall that community outreach managed to put together a Kainoa meals program that we used to feed kupuna in our community to make sure folks weren't going hungry. So I know that that request is critical, and I especially want to acknowledge that we're trying our best to make sure that we're not asking for crazy amounts of money for no reason, but that we're being strategic about it for sure. But coming off of that discussion about the budget bill, OHA also introduced House Bill 203 and Senate Bill 390, requesting capital improvement project money in the amount of $3 million to support the construction of a water storage and distribution infrastructure on our Wahiawa lands. And really, this is where Brutus comes in with his expertise. Can you give us some background on this bill and an idea of what this bill could do for our community?
Sure. Let me just, I've prepared a presentation. Let me pull that up. Okay. Does everything look good on that side? Okay, awesome. Okay, so yeah, aloha kako. So sharing information on our OHA 2 bill. As you can see on the slide there, request for CIP funds for a water storage and distribution system at our Wahiawa lands, just like Kainoa said. And I do want to just quickly say a big mahalo to Taylor Asao and Lori Walker. They're kind of like my bosses, and they're the ones who really put this together. And mahalo for the collaboration with Wayne and Olan. We appreciate everything you guys are doing to help us over in Aina. And so this bill is essentially about why. Yeah, it's about water being the key element for life and growth. And there is a lot of history for this site, for this property. and that informs this project. And so I hope to explain it a little better with just a little bit of background information for you. So just to orientate you, just in case you're unfamiliar with this area, we're here in the central plateau of Oahu, the Pico, if you will. And the Kukaniloko birthing stones are inside this little rectangle here that's labeled a 5-acre parcel. The OHA lands are these 511 acres bordered in white here, and this former pineapple lands there. And of course, just so you know where you are, Whitmer Village to the north, Wahioa right there, Wahioa town, and then to the west, Schofield Barracks. Yeah. So now I'm sure that most people have some sort of common knowledge that this place is very culturally significant. Yeah, it's a chiefly birthing site for some of the most prominent ali'i in Hawaiian history, and also a training grounds for these ali'i. Yeah, raised and trained to provide for their people. In more recent times, iliahi or sandalwood trade saw the depletion of these forests. Couple that with the later ranching period, and both would lead to like a complete deforestation and huge change to the native ecology. And then lastly, bring on the pineapple monoculture that followed shortly after, and it just further degraded the quality of the soil. Fast forward a little bit of time, in 2012, OHA acquired the 511 acres that I showed you surrounding Kukaniloko with some very specific acquisition purposes that are listed there for you, but to protect the birthing stones by providing a buffer against future incompatible development in the area, to explore the development of compatible agricultural uses and other programmatic initiatives, to contribute to Hawaii's food self-sufficiency, that's a very important one for us, and to preserve open space and watershed lands and the overall community planning goals for Central Oahu. So with those acquisition purposes in mind, OHA knew we wanted to plan this plan to come from the community. Yeah. So we kind of worked and reached out to some people and created a working group with very specific purpose to advise OHA in the creation of this plan, to help us to refine mana'o provided by the larger community. And here's this photo here on the top right shows the working group members there. I think some people recognize some of those faces, or at least a handful. And then the rest of these 3 photos here are from various community and public meetings that we had to gather input. One really important thing that came out of the working group was that they strongly encouraged OHA to look at those acquisition purposes from a Hawaiian perspective. And so those acquisition purposes then became these guiding values for the working group and their approach to planning for this place, where ho'omana now is the being the protection against future incompatible development. Yeah, that thing that really protects the stones and elevates its sense of spirituality and culture. Ho'ona'auau is that exploration and development of compatible agricultural uses and other programmatic and educational initiatives. And then lastly, ho'oulu'aina, this is where we're trying to get to, is a restoration of place and watershed while simultaneously contributing to Hawaii's food self-sufficiency. And to further imbue these values into the plan, the working group created a guiding statement that I'll read for you. Is this place is a wahikapu with mana that has existed since time immemorial and will exist for time eternal. It is an ecosystem of connectivity between our aina and people. And so once they were able to align with these values and this guiding statement, what the working group really did was help us to synthesize community input into 4 programmatic outcomes that would be the foundation of this master plan. For all of these outcomes here on the screen, integrated programming will be implemented where programs occurring here will intersect at multiple levels for protection, education, healing, preservation, culture, environment, and resource regeneration. The education continuum sees Kukaniloko as a place for intergenerational engagement and symbiotic learning that spans the life cycles from keiki to kupuna. and will be a way to perpetuate knowledge and culture. The hub and spoke outcome is a program model where our communities can leverage each other's strengths and resources to work together for collaborative partnerships to create a collective impact. So here, Kukaniloko is the Pico, yeah. It strategically connects to other aina and to resources that further Hawaiʻi. And then for the vegetation continuum concept, we acknowledge that the aina has been through so much trauma. And so the question is, how do we bring back the Hawaiian ecology that once existed here? And so the vegetation continuum was this idea where we include soil remediation and we run the full spectrum of growth from native forest restoration to food forests, agroforestry, demonstration ag plots for education, and high-tech agricultural practices that would help lend to Hawaii's self-sufficiency. And then lastly, I just want to say that the specific programs of these 4 outcomes may include access management, docent training, growing stewardship capacity, programs centered around healing, cultural training, capacity building, practice of pono agriculture with the concept of growing people by growing resources, which will grow leaders for tomorrow. And for these programmatic outcomes to manifest, it was helpful to have a master conceptual site plan that was developed to help us define what kind of physical spaces these outcomes would flourish in. And so this includes a velina, which is way over here, or like a welcome pavilion to help orient visitors to this place and to teach them appropriate ways to behave in cultural places such as Kukaniloko. An interpretive center, kind of here in the middle. And these sites are just arbitrary, yeah, it's conceptual in nature, but an interpretive center is a type of space with the potentiality to function somewhat like a multi-purpose kauhale, where the bulk of programmatic education and culture would take place. Yeah, and then we have kupu zones or grow zones, places places for all types of veg and agriculture and reforestation. These would be strategically designed to work with the topography and cultural significance of this place. In the planning process with the working group, it was abundantly clear that the community wanted to bring back the Iliahi forest. And so I kind of point out these really dark areas along the edges, yeah, and these darker areas around the birthing stones themselves, and even these other shaded green areas. These were kind of meant, and the idea behind them was that these were, part of the forest to bring back that forest to help feed the aquifer. And how amazing would it be, to one day drive through Wahiawa on your way to the North Shore and be able to experience what an Iliahi forest might have been like. So, however, I do want to say that there is currently no water available on this property. Yeah, we don't have any water here. And as it pertains to this bill, water storage tanks will be located at the top of the map where you can see this area here and help to feed with the distribution system all the vegetative growth. 500 acres is really big, so we have a lot to, we got to start somewhere and we've got a lot of ground to cover. But as I alluded to earlier, water is critical to life, and each of these outcomes and the various programs will require water. Especially this vegetation continuum, especially if we want to build up Hawaii's self-sufficiency to global issues such as this pandemic. So this is why OHA is requesting a CIP for the design and construction of a water storage and distribution system. Here is just the specific language inside of the bill. It was heard a couple days ago, and so there may be some revisions coming up, but we'll still ask for the support and for this bill behind it. And so I just wanted to reiterate, this picture here is Kukaniloko, Kapuahuava, the birthing stones, of Wahiawa. The community shared a big vision with OHA, and the water is a crucial first step to implementing the goals set forth in the CMP. To restore this land, to grow the forest, to contribute to Hawaii's food security, the bottom line is we need water. Yeah, and when it comes to food and resources, COVID has clearly shown how vulnerable our pai'aina is in our dependency on imported food and goods. So this project truly is an investment in Hawaii's resiliency. And a resilient Hawaii can bring forth a thriving people so that a place like Kukaniloko can once again be a training grounds for all of the elite of our future. So with that, I just want to say mahalo.
Mahalo nui, Brutus. Mahalo nui for sharing that. We do have one question,
Oh, yeah.
and that question is, what about Nairo on the property?
Oh yeah, in the master plan, we actually have a list of all kinds of native plants that grew and thrived in the area before. And so, yeah, I mean, we're even just started this week discussions about being able to host endangered species on this property. And because of the agricultural designation, it might give us an opportunity to perform very proactive and beneficial maintenance measures that can't be performed in other conservation zone lands. So yeah, working with DOFA on that, and they're very excited about the potentiality there.
Awesome, awesome. Mahalo for the presentation. It certainly helps me understand why it was important. This is actually a reintroduction of a bill that they did last year as well. So totally mahalo nui about that. Moving on to the third set of bills, House Bill 202 and Senate Bill 391 that OHA added to its package, which has to do with our houseless ohana. Wayne, can you tell us more about these particular set of bills?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kainoa. Man, Brutus's presentation is always so beautiful to watch. Unfortunately, I don't have a PowerPoint, but I can talk about our OHA 3 or the third bill in our legislative package. So I think it's important. We know that Native Hawaiians are at higher risk of being houseless or becoming houseless. We also know that the criminal justice system in general impacts the Native Hawaiian community in a disproportionate way at pretty much every stage of the whole process, from arrest rates to conviction rates, the severity of sentencing, the whole spectrum. And so these are two significant impacts. And unfortunately, when you combine houselessness and its criminalization, the impacts are compounded. And so what this bill tries to do is to mitigate those impacts and kind of mitigate that cycle of houselessness and the criminalization of houselessness that can have a huge impact on not only folks experiencing houselessness, but also on our our houselessness challenges overall. And so the problem this bill tries to address is that oftentimes there are these laws that are targeted at or almost exclusively enforced against people experiencing houselessness. So things like obstructing sidewalks or sleeping in your car at night, on the street, or sleeping in the park overnight. And when people, they get citations, they get arrested, convicted, they have these records that follow them. And so even though they've paid all of their dues to society, when they do try to, apply for a job, apply for housing, apply for, government IDs and that kind of thing, then these laws, these records can inhibit them from actually taking those steps, which are, critical for them to be able to start navigating their way, off the streets into a better situation. And so what this bill does is it would provide a means by which people who have criminal records relating to what are so-called quality of life crimes, so like I said, sleeping in the park, after hours, or sleeping in your car, blocking the sidewalk, it allows them, it provides a process where if they've paid all their dues, they've served their time, they've complied with any probation or parole requirements, everything except for outstanding, fines or fees, which can stack up because, they can't pay and then they just have hundreds of dollars of fines and fees. Except for those things, as long as they've paid their dues, then they can apply to have their records expunged. And so they won't have this stigma following them around and actually keeping them from, taking the steps necessary to improve their situation. And again, this doesn't stop any laws from being enforced if they have to be. But to the extent that someone is ready to take those steps, then it clears the pathway for them to do so. And so in a nutshell, that's OHA 3 or HB 202 and SB 391. And we did have a hearing yesterday on SB 391, and so that measure moved forward. So we're excited to see some movement, and we're very encouraged by some of the discussions, just the discussions that these bills are sparking about how we address houselessness and how we deal with this very challenging situation that we have.
And has the Senate bill been scheduled for hearing yet?
Yes, so the Senate bill had a hearing yesterday. The House bill, I don't think it's been scheduled. Yeah, it hasn't been scheduled yet. But we'll be sure to send out an action alert, or you folks will be sending out the action alert to folks who are interested in helping to support this measure and other measures in our package.
Awesome. I'm very fond of that bill. I think that's critical if we want to do our best to help people stand up, then these are the kind of measures that I think are important to realizing those things.
Absolutely.
The last piece of this year's legislative package is a pair of resolutions. What issue does House Concurrent Resolution 3 and Senate Concurrent Resolution 5 cover?
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Kainoa.
Sure.
So this pandemic, it really highlighted what has been long-standing challenges that we've been facing in getting clear data that's specific to the Native Hawaiian community, from in all kinds of areas and from all kinds of agencies. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of consistency in how agencies collect their data, process it, share it with other agencies like OHA. And because of that, it's really hard. We have a really hard time coming up with figuring out what's the best policies to advocate for, what are the best interventions to invest in, that kind of thing. And especially in COVID, when COVID started, we wanted to know, are Native Hawaiians getting sick? Are they losing their jobs more? Are they getting arrested more because of emergency orders or whatnot? And that can, if we know that, have that information, then we know, what kinds of, whether it's education, whether it's financial relief and support, we can actually really specifically tailor what we do, our activities, to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19. And so what this resolution does is it offers 3 steps that we think can be taken to kind of get better data from agencies, and then as a step towards being more efficient and effective in our work. And so the first step is it identifies some pretty what we feel are some pretty critical agencies in terms of pretty critical agencies that have data that are particularly important to mitigating the impacts of the pandemic, helping lift our communities up, from this unfortunate situation that we're in. And so those agencies would be the Department of Health, Department of Human Services, Department of Labor and Industrial Relations, the Judiciary, and the county police departments. And so for these agencies, the resolution asks that if they do have Native Hawaiian specific data, if they can share it with us, so we can start looking at that data. The second part, it also looks at to those same agencies and asks if they can work with us, work with the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander COVID-19 response, recovery, and resilience team to come up with agreements and procedures so that going forward, their data collection, processing, sharing, their data governance practices can be improved. And then the third step, it kind of takes a bigger picture look at the situation and asks if we can get together with the Office of Planning and the Office of Enterprise Technology Services to see if there's a way where we can kind of take a snapshot assessment of the data governance infrastructure across state agencies. And so with that picture, we can then figure out, where are the gaps? What are the best next steps to take to improve the data practices across the state? Yeah, and so in a nutshell, that's our OHA 4 resolution, which is HCR 3 and SCR 5.
Excellent, excellent. Which, I mean, is sort of a theme of the entire package, right? Is making sure that we are strategically informed so that we can leverage funding and make sure we're giving the highest and best service to our community as a whole, For sure. Now that covers all four pieces of legislation that composed, or all eight as it were, that composed the OHA package. But are there any other bills that may have caught your eye thus far?
Yes, thanks, Kainoa, for asking that. So we have a few other bills that we have been conducting coordinated advocacy on. And one issue is related to the state's early learning board and their position for Hawaiian medium early learning education providers. So before session started, just a little bit of a backstory. Before session started, OHA Punana Leo came to us with an issue that they've been having with maintaining their position on the state's early learning board. And basically the early learning board, or the ELB, is responsible for formulating statewide policy relating to early learning education, which is education from prenatal care up into entry into kindergarten, pre-K. And since the ELB was established in 2012, it's included a seat, as I said, for Hawaiian medium early learning providers, which OHA Punana Leo has historically filled. However, recently, the 2-year term with 2-year consecutive maximum limits on this seat have really been challenging for OHA Punana Leo to find a representative with enough experience and institutional knowledge to adequately represent the Hawaiian voice on the early learning board. So this session, there are 2 bills regarding this issue that OHA has helped with. And one of them is the Senate version, Senate Bill 1384. And the House version, which the House Native Hawaiian Caucus actually introduced, is House Bill 546. So Senate Bill 1384 is actually up for hearing in the Senate Committee on Education right after this event. It starts at 3 p.m. if anyone's able to log on or check it out. And I'll actually have to leave a little early to testify at this hearing, but we're really hoping that those in the Native Hawaiian community can keep a lookout and try to support these bills, which they differ in their approach, but their overall function is still basically the same in that it would exempt the Hawaiian medium representative seat from the 2 consecutive term limit prohibition, which has really been a challenge, like I said, for such a small specialized field like Aloha Hawaii to find qualified representatives with enough experience. So you could help out by submitting supportive testimony on either of these bills and reaching out to your senators or representatives to support this effort as well. And yeah, just in closing about these bills, they're really important to realize our overall bigger goal to fulfill the state's constitutional mandate under Article 10, Section 4 to promote the study of Hawaiian language and achieve our greater goal, which is of course to normalize Aloha Hawaii for future generations. So yeah, that's one effort. I think Wayne has a few others he might talk about and other issues that we're opposing or not supportive of maybe.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Leimomi. You know, a couple I think encouraging bills are that we did not introduce, but that other legislators have introduced, and I think we're very appreciative for. They're proposing to again revisit the share of public land trust revenues that should be set aside for the benefit of Native Hawaiians. As a quick background, so the Admission Act and our state constitution and state law all contemplate that the public land trust lands, which are a subset of the ceded lands that were taken during the overthrow and then ceded to the United States government, that this public land trust corpus, a pro rata portion of the revenues generated from that corpus be set aside for the benefit of Native Hawaiians. And the understanding is that it should be about 20% of revenues, or it should be 20% of revenues. And unfortunately, there's been debate as to what revenue streams should be subject to that 20% requirement. And so there's been a settlement in 2006 to set an interim amount of 15.1 million that gets transferred to OHA to represent that 20% share. And unfortunately, since that time, even though we've been getting reports from the states that show that the revenue streams they agree should be subject to the public land trust share, like those historically agreed upon revenue streams, 20% of that amount is far greater than 15.1 million. I think 35 million is what we currently believe should be the appropriate amount. Unfortunately, it's been 15 years and there still has been no movement to adjust that 15.1 million interim rate. And so there's a couple measures to at least kind of take steps towards revisiting that amount. SB 321 as it was originally drafted and HB 1265. And so we're keeping an eye on those. We're trying to have conversations with our legislators and committee members about how important it is, especially I think now knowing that how much the Native Hawaiian community has been impacted from the pandemic. Now might be a good time to kind of uphold the state's obligations under the public land trust to the Native Hawaiian community. Unfortunately, as Leimomi indicated, there's also, I think, a number of other bills that we are keeping an eye on because of the significant impacts they may have on negative impacts they may have on the Native Hawaiian community or the interests of Native Hawaiians. I think there's a big, there's been a growing number of proposals in recent years, including this year, for example, to give the state the ability to lease out public lands, which could include ceded lands, to which Native Hawaiians have never relinquished their claims. These bills are that the state lease them out for up to 99 years or potentially longer. And our concern is that when you lease these ceded lands for for multiple generations at a time, you're effectively foreclosing the claims of Native Hawaiians to these lands, for a century, for longer even. And also too, when private entities have control over public lands for so long, there's a sense of entitlement that creates that often leads to significant political pressure to essentially sell these lands in fee to the lessees. And we've actually seen that happen before. And we've actually sued. It took about 15 years, but there was a lawsuit that was filed to stop the sale of ceded lands until the claims of Native Hawaiians have been resolved. That lawsuit resulted in a settlement where the state, before it sells any public lands, has to give OHA 3 months notice so that we can check to see if it's ceded. It also requires that before any ceded lands are sold, that the legislature approve that sale by a 2/3 supermajority. And so that's a law that's been in place since 2009. But unfortunately, when it doesn't apply to leases. And so, when the state's proposing these century-long leases that could, foreclose Native Hawaiian claims for a century or indefinitely, they are not subject to those requirements. So we're keeping a very close eye on a number of bills that would propose to give this authority to different agencies. I can, just as, for example, we have HB 607, SB 1, those are companion measures. We have HB 66, HB 81, SB 2. I mean, the list goes on. So there's a number of bills that we're trying to talk, and we're trying to offer, our mana'o and explain to our policymakers and to other folks who are, I think some of these bills are actually well-intentioned, but I think they're just not considering the impacts they may have on, Native Hawaiian claims to their lands. Yes. And there's, yeah, so let's see. I guess if there's particular subject matter areas that folks are interested in, I can maybe talk about some bills that might be salient to those. I know there's some there's some talk now about ensuring that state decision makers are properly educated as to what the law is regarding Native Hawaiian rights and the public trust. There's a bill that is very similar to a bill that we introduced in our package last year that would make it so that key decision makers like the Board of Land Natural Resources, the Water Commission, make it so that they're more incentivized to comply with the existing requirement that they attend a Native Hawaiian rights and public trust training course that's currently administered by the University of Hawaii Law School by the Kahuliao Center for Excellence in Native Hawaiian Law. And that would be HB 800 and SB 1409. There's also a bill, a number of bills looking at the State Council on Mental Health, and this is actually also a OHA legislative package measure from a couple of years ago. And so these bills would require the State Council on Mental Health have at least 3 seats reserved for individuals with backgrounds in Native Hawaiian healing methodologies, Native Hawaiian cultural practice relating to health. And this is really so that we can ensure that there's more consistently available opportunities for culturally grounded mental health programs and services, which we think is very important given what we know about some of the really sad disproportionate rates of mental health risk factors and challenges that we're seeing in the Native Hawaiian community, as well as the success that we've seen when you do apply this cultural foundation to mental health interventions. Yeah, I think those are some of the higher level bills that we've been keeping eyes on. But again, if folks have questions about other subject matter areas, we can try and see if anything's popped up on our radars thus far.
Sure. Yeah, I do have one question for either Wayne or Leimomi. What percentage of OHA's budget request goes to direct services for beneficiaries, such as legal, education, or social services? You can go to either one.
Oh yeah, Kalamai, I thought I answered that in the chat, but it's 51% of the general funds that we receive from state go directly to services, but we also match these funds with our trust funds. And I also dropped in the chat a link with more information on our budget request too, if anyone wants to check that out for more details.
I think that's the only question I see that we have here. Okay, so we have gone through the OHA legislative package. We have talked about other critical bills that we are supportive of or have some concerns about. How can our beneficiaries, how can the community at large, how can our audience, how can they get involved? How can they help you? To anyone.
Well, our community outreach team has a great action alert system. So if you go to oha.org/legislation, you can, on the right-hand side, you can, I don't know which is right for you folks, but you can actually sign up for action alerts. And we don't necessarily blast on every single bill that we're keeping an eye on, but because we don't want to deluge folks' inboxes with action alerts on everything. But I think for high profile stuff, especially our package, the Ahapuna Aleo bill, other high profile bills will be sure to help keep people engaged and apprised of hearings and so forth. They also have instructions on how to testify built into those action alerts to make it easy for folks.
Yeah, and if you just sign up through the Capitol website, it's pretty easy and user-friendly to be able to add bills that you're interested in or resolutions that you want to keep track of, and they can email you directly that way for things you're personally invested in. And I guess I just wanted to stress to everyone that you do matter and your voices do really make a difference. I mean, I've been at some hearings where there's literally 3 or 4 testimonies. And so the committee has to look at that, right? And if everyone's opposed to something, it's kind of like, a lot of times they're not really able to pass it. So even just one testimony really, really makes a difference for a lot of these smaller but really important issues, especially like Olala Hawaii. So yeah, your voice matters.
I think that's incredibly important to definitely emphasize. I used to work for Senator, now Congressman Kainoa, and he innocently, in conversation with some constituents, introduced what was at the time referred to as like Peter Kemba Bill, which would have required folks that are homeschooling to enter into this registration process, and that bill, oh, excuse me, sorry, and that bill got scheduled, and the overwhelming opposition to that bill was palpable. In fact, they couldn't fit everyone into the same room. They had to put them in an overflow room next door. And you know, Kai was just trying to, Congressman was working on just trying to create a situation where, at the time, what they were saying was that certain people, his parents exploited the homeschooling system, and that may have played a part in what eventually happened to them. And so to minimize the likelihood of that being leveraged again, there would be this registration system. But it made many homeschoolers and families show up in opposition, and you know, then Senator Kahele was listening from his office. He came into the committee hearing, and he personally asked the chair, which was Senator Kidani at the time, to withdraw the bill. And so if there was ever a demonstration of how important your voice is, that's one of them. You know, it seemed like an innocuous bill at the time, but your manatwa is definitely critical. Anything else? Is there, Brutus, is there anything else anybody would like to add with regard to how folks can help? Or do you think we've covered it all? Right.
Yeah, just being as alert as you can. You know, everyone's super busy and we do this for a living, but you know, do what you can, especially for things that are really important to you. And I think for me personally, just knowing who your representatives and senators are and wherever you live or you're from is super important, because you are their constituent. You know, they need to listen to you basically, because you're the ones that are voting for them. So knowing the names of whoever's representing where you live or where you're from is super important, and it's super easy to find. You can just basically just Google it.
Right. And there is a change to the testimony process this year, correct? What is that change, Wayne?
So, you know, of course, the Capitol is closed to the public because of COVID and the need to socially distance. So everything's virtual now. And so the legislature is asking that anyone that wants to submit testimony do so through the Capitol website. But it's super easy. You just make an account. You register for an account, and then you with a sign-in password, and then you just, any bill you want, you look it up, you click submit testimony, and yeah, go through the Capitol website portal, I guess, in that sense. They're also asking that testimonies, if you want to orally testify, they're doing it via Zoom, and they're asking that if you want to orally testify, you also submit written testimony, and that testimony be submitted at least 24 hours in advance of the hearing. Yeah, so I mean, it's a little bit, it's both more open because you can testify remotely, but then also to, you know, there's some deadlines that are being a little more strictly enforced this year. Oh, and I have some breaking exciting news. So the House list expungement bill on the House side, which hadn't had a hearing up to now, has just been scheduled for a hearing. So it's got a hearing on Tuesday, on the 9th, February 9th, which means your testimony at 9:30, which means if you want to testify, you have to testify by Monday at 9:30. And this is before the Committee on Health, Human Services, and Homelessness. So yeah, if you're interested in this bill, you can look up, it's HB 202, or you can sign up for our action alerts, and then you'll be getting action alerts shortly. The machine is now rolling to get those out. Yeah, exciting.
Okay, and I just got one more question. What is OHA's position on the proposed casino? I'll kick that over to Wayne.
Okay, yeah, we haven't. We're still monitoring that that bill, and we're trying to do a careful analysis of benefits and potential unintended consequences. Yeah, so my understanding is that I think the House bill had a hearing this morning on the House vehicle. I don't think it made it out of committee though.
Okay, I think I got all the questions, and I think you guys gave great examples of how folks can be engaged and kako'o your efforts with this legislative package. So mahalo to all of you for being here, for taking time out of your busy schedules, because I know Leimomi's got to run off to a hearing. I'm sure if you wait 5 minutes, he'll have another hearing he's got to run to. And I just want to mahalo again, everyone that has joined us for this Aloha Rising episode. I hope that you found your time with us to be helpful and fruitful as you navigate this legislative session. And most importantly, I hope you feel inspired to kako'o and support, kako'o, Wayne, Leimomi, Brutus, and OHA's entire public policy team as they shepherd these great bills through the legislative process. Don't forget to head over to our website, oha.org/legislation to sign up for action alerts that will let you know when these and other critical bills impacting Native Hawaiian issues are scheduled and need testimony. And if you haven't already, head to capital.hawaii.gov and register for a Hawaii Legislature account through which you can create personalized bill tracking lists, submit testimony, and receive hearing notifications by email. Lastly, I hope you'll join us next week, Thursday at 3 p.m. for our next episode covering neighborhood boards. What are they? Who serves on them? And how can you be a part of them? Okay, until then, ahuiho, malamopono.
Ahuiho.
Mahalo.
Mahalo.